Welcome to the Daily Horror Habit Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Krieger, bringing you daily reviews of currently streaming horror movies for your twisted pleasure. Be aware that these reviews may include mild spoilers. And as always, I hope you enjoy. Today I'm joined by my good friend, Sam Kiley. How's it going, man?
Good, man. How's everything?
Not bad, just still dealing with this lockdown situation, which
Trying to survive.
Yeah, trying to survive. Lots of time for watching movies and making podcasts, so trying to stay positive.
Yes,
but
sir.
For every time I have a guest on, I like to kind of start out with asking, what was the first horror movie that you watched that scared you as a kid? So last time I had mutual friends Berto and Sarah on to review something, and I told them that the first scene that scared me as a kid was the original Poltergeist.
Mm-hmm.
It was directed by Tobe Hooper. It came out in the 80s. And there's this scene, it's a PG movie, and there's this scene where a guy's looking in a mirror and his face like starts to melt. And it's just super aggressive and out of left field because it's a pretty creepy movie. But then to see something that graphic in a PG movie, like I was not looking in mirrors for a while after that one.
Yeah, I feel you. For me, do you remember the movie The Haunting?
I do not. I haven't seen that.
One of those movies where like everybody gets invited to this house. It's like, a manor, and the manor's haunted. And I looked at the cast. I didn't even realize.
Right? It's a remake of The Haunting in Hill House, I think. It has Liam Neeson.
Yeah, Owen Wilson.
Virginia Madsen.
Catherine Zeta-Jones.
Oh, wow. That's a stacked cast, huh?
Yeah, and there's this scene, I don't remember who it is, but someone's playing the piano, and there's like strings in it. If you look inside a piano, there's like strings and like, things that kind of give it its tone and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And one of the strings broke, or the chords, and like slit some guy's eye.
Oh, geez.
And and like that, like scarred me for such a long time. Like I couldn't even look at like a guitar or like a, piano without thinking like, what if that shit snaps?
I mean, with the example that I had, at least like it's illogical to be scared of that. Your face would never obviously just start melting. But with that, that's something that could actually happen.
Yeah.
Like, it's unlikely, but there's a
right.
possibility that shit could actually happen, which if anything that could carry over into adulthood.
I know. So that is the first thing that truly scared me. It was that, and it was, I hate to say it, but Thriller. Like watching Thriller for the first time, and Mike turns into a zombie, that messed me up. But those two things I can remember like vividly as things that really scared me that kind of carried on. But when I was like younger,
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's, I like that those are scares that they scare you, but then something that you can kind of grow out of.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas I was talking to somebody recently, and they were scarred by It, the original It, the miniseries, and they're like, "Yeah, I still can't look at clowns." And I was just,
that's
good. A rough one. That's scarring.
People have trouble with clowns. People have real trouble with that.
But so today you actually picked the film for us to review, and I'm excited to talk about it because it's probably one of my favorite horror films of the last, I don't know, almost decade probably, and it's one that I don't think gets a lot of love or nearly as much as it should. So today we're reviewing Sinister, which is directed and co-written by Scott Derrickson. He was the director behind Exorcism of Emily Rose and Doctor Strange. And Sinister is currently streaming on Netflix. Yeah. So Sinister, the quick summary is Ethan Hawke stars as a washed-up true crime writer, Ellison Oswald, who's looking for a fresh start. After moving his family into the house of a grisly murder, he discovers a box of Super 8 films that seem to belong to the killer he's researching. Things go from spooky to hellish as his research uncovers unimaginable new horrors. So this is a film that I don't think gets nearly as much love as it should. And it's surprising considering it has such a big name actor in the lead.
Right. Yeah, I mean, Ethan Hawke. I mean, what can you say about that guy?
Right.
He's been in some really good movies, but I think the thing is he had kind of a lull in his career in front of screen. I think he went more towards production and like producing stuff. So
He's also an author. He was also an author for a period of time, I think.
Yeah. So I think it was like post Ethan Hawke, like the Ethan Hawke, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
When this movie came out for him, and like he kind of had a resurgence, I feel like, after he did this movie. But
For sure. I
yeah, you
mean,
would think,
this was like one of, I think, 3 horror movies that he did pretty close together. He was in
yeah.
The Purge. He was in
Mm.
a vampire movie called Daybreakers, which
Oh,
is
I never
always on
saw that.
Netflix, and then obviously Sinister.
Right.
But I think this is by far the best, and
Oh yeah.
it's not only is it in part to his performance, but it's mostly because I think of Scott Derrickson. Like, this movie has such a distinct feel to it that
Hmm.
I don't think a lot of kind of true crime haunting movies have been able to replicate.
Yeah. I agree with that. And it just, I don't know if it's because it feels real. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
It feels very gritty. Like, I mean, I'm sure we'll get into just how Ethan Hawke and his wife talk, their
Mhm.
conversations alone. You know what I mean? Like, the script is very, it feels real. It's very like how a couple would normally talk, or how people would normally talk to each other.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um,
So Scott Derrickson co-wrote it with a writer named Robert Cargill,
mhm,
and both of them were writers first, and so they based a lot of the conversations between Ethan Hawke's character Ellison and his wife Tracy, who's played by Juliet Rylance.
mhm.
They based those on conversations that they'd had with their significant others during the course
Oh
of their
wow,
career.
there you
And
go.
on a second viewing, that's something that I kind of came to appreciate a little more. And because when I first saw the movie, I didn't think much of Ellison's character. I thought he was kind of just this prick. But
Yeah,
then you realize that it's more about a flaw in his character and that he's like constantly chasing this fame because his
yeah,
last book, Kentucky Blood, was like his big hit. But that
right.
was his 15 minutes of fame because the reason that he's in this house researching this new case is that he hasn't had a hit in 10 years. One of
Hmm.
his books he wrote, he got it wrong, and a killer went free at one point. And
Yeah,
he's kind of just like so badly chasing this old ideal of how he views himself in his career that he starts to get away from the things in his life that actually matter, like his family.
yeah. I like how you said that because I noticed I noticed that relationship with his wife more, and I also noticed how he was more, and I felt bad, like you said, I felt bad for him and just kind of what he was going through. And there's actually a moment in the movie after they have an argument where he's just like on the couch, or he's like in a chair, and he has like a drink in his hand.
Mm-hmm.
He has, and he's watching one of the interviews he did, and his wife comes in, and like she feels so bad for him, and like she's like just sees that he's just like helpless, and like yeah, it's you see
That's
that
a rough
more this
scene.
time. It is a very rough scene.
How he
They
keeps
go through like
returning, he keeps returning to watching. And again, it highlights how flawed his character is and how his
yeah,
character's inability to like move on with his life is
yeah,
that he has all of his old uh, book tour or book press
hmm,
interviews from like late night shows and stuff that he's watching constantly. And it's just like, all right, man, you got
yeah.
some research to do if you want to write that next book. You got to stop kind of drinking away your sorrows and living in the past.
I know, and I remember like one of the arguments they had. He was like, "This could be my big shot. Like we could be famous again." And she's like, "I don't care about that." And he's like, "Everybody cares about that." And you're like,
Yeah,
"Oh no,
yeah.
oh man."
But I mean, so this is probably the 4th or 5th time I've watched this now since it was
Hmm.
released. And I was blown away by the fact that how uncomfortable the movie's Super 8 footage is still.
Oh yeah.
Because the film intermittently jumps between, obviously, the live action, but then it also cuts between the Super 8 footage that he finds. And the
Hmm.
Super 8 footage basically is consisting of the murders that he's investigating. He doesn't know how they've got
Right.
in the house. He just finds all the Super 8 film and the Super 8 projector. And
Hmm.
each of the Super 8 films has a different family being murdered in a more gruesome way.
Yeah.
And they actually shot that on a real Super 8 to get that
Dang.
look to it, which I
Hmm.
think is so key to making those scenes feel like they're actually snuff films in a way
Yeah,
that,
they got to feel authentic.
yeah, exactly. It has that authenticity that, I don't know, it almost feels like you're watching something you shouldn't be.
Hmm.
You know how like when you were a kid and you'd be watching a movie that on TV, like something too violent or whatever
Yeah.
it's supposed to be, and you're like, yo, this is some naughty shit. I better not get caught
Yeah.
watching. It's like
Looking
that.
over your shoulder every 2 seconds, like, oh man.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that, but it's like, yo, if somebody walks in, they might think I'm into some stuff that I'm definitely not into.
I know. And it's funny because I kept, even though I know what happens, I kept
Mhm.
finding myself thinking throughout the movie that one of the kids or the wife was gonna walk in and see it. Even though I've seen the movie a million times, like I
Right.
still had that feeling like, oh, like he shouldn't be watching this. Like he definitely should probably, burn it, which I mean he does. Um, but yeah, the Super 8 film it's weird because watching it, I've only watched it like 4 times maybe, but this time, like I appreciated the cinematography throughout, but even within those films, the way they're shot, like shot from the trees. My favorite is the second family that I think gets locked in the car and then end up getting burnt
Oh, the
alive.
fire. Yeah.
I love how that was shot, just because like you're watching from like the bottom of a hill and you just see the guy and there's like a normal, it's like nothing's happening
Mhm.
and it just feels normal, you know what I mean? And then
Yeah.
it's such a drastic switch to them all being like knocked out in a car.
Mhm.
And even just the shot where you see the wife first and then like you see the kid's legs, so you're like, oh, like one of the kids got it, and then you see the dad in the back and you're just like, oh, this is not good. But the way they shot that, and he kind of goes around, then he just like pauses and then like he throws whatever he throws at the car, it blows up. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, I enjoyed all those shots and like the footage, especially in each murder scene, I
Yeah.
guess you could say.
I don't know that the film works without those key scenes also. I think it's just such a big part of being unsettling throughout. And this
Yeah.
idea that he's going to keep finding new films, or he's going to keep revealing new films of different
Mm-hmm.
murders that are in these like unimaginable, grisly ways.
Yeah.
It's just super unsettling and uncomfortable the whole time. And I
Yeah.
think that that really ties into the film, and that the atmosphere of all the scenes, even when he's just in the house alone at night by himself, or
Right.
when everybody's asleep and the lights are off,
Yeah.
you just assume something's going to come out of the corner of a room and jump out at him.
And that was, I mean, what the one thing I will say, one last thing I will say about the footage also is the music.
Yes.
The music. I don't know
That
who
was
was screaming and singing and doing what,
that was my
but
next point I was going to bring up. That's great. Yeah.
that like added so much to the just uncomfortable nature of each scene, and like you felt what he was feeling because like he
Mm.
watches it and you just like he's just like taking a swig of his whiskey, you know what I mean? Like he just like can't
Yeah.
even bear it. And the music, you're just like, oh no, like this is really bad. This just feels, you feel like how he feels, kind of. You just feel
Mhm.
uncomfortable.
Yeah. So the soundtrack was composed by a guy named Christopher Young, and he used a combination of, I would call it like tribal haunting music or something like
Hmm.
that, because you get those kind of like drum beats, and then you hear
Yeah.
like little distant voices that are like chanting something in the
Hmm.
background. And I think that that really helps to, because it's a soundtrack that is immediately strange because it's
Yeah.
kind of unlike anything you've ever heard. It sounds like it's a bunch of different combinations of things put together.
Hmm.
And so it kind of adds this, I would call it like angelic chaos to scenes that are
It
happening,
does.
because because especially your example of the Super 8 footage when the family gets burnt alive,
Hmm.
like you don't hear them screaming. You don't
No.
hear like a I don't know the word, or something, the type of music that you would hear in like a jump scare where there's like a
Right.
high shriek or something like that to kind of like unnerve you. It
Hmm.
just has this kind of like calm but very strange tribal music that's playing, and it
Yeah.
really ties into the idea that later in the film, when we learn that Bagul, this pagan deity, is hundreds or thousands of years old, that music I
Hmm.
think helps to convey that
Yeah, it
in a
does.
way that music doesn't always convey much about the killer, but I think
Yeah.
it really does in this movie, in crafting this kind of new not ideology, but identity around this this figure.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that completely. It gives you that sense of this weird, like you don't really know exactly, like it's 100,000 years old, like
Mm-hmm.
could be just, but it's really just a timeless thing, you know what I mean? And like, yeah, it just was uncomfortable. And I don't know how you would even think, like, how do they think to make music, to make that music, because it seems
Right.
perfect almost. It seems like that's exactly the kind of music you would need to pull off that scene to make you feel, you know? So I was thinking about that a lot last night. Like, how do they even, because you have the regular soundtrack, right? You have the regular music that goes on throughout the movie. That's more of the, like you said, like kind of giving you suspense and like, you know, something's going to happen. But then with those scenes, it's like you said, there's no suspense. You're just kind of in it, you know, and you kind of have to just like, you have to take that scene and you have to just sit there with him, you know, and watch it. So.
Yeah, so getting into I'm jumping a little bit ahead to some of my half-assed research, but so the way that they actually made some of these tracks was they took ambient tracks from other bands that are like Norwegian black metal, which I'm not familiar with. But if you asked me what Norwegian black metal sounded like, I would say some shit exactly like
that.
Yeah, exactly like that. But I think it's very telling again that the soundtrack is something that is not easily identifiable, and yet for me it becomes such a staple of what makes this movie so great. And it really is, I think, one of the best horror soundtracks of the last decade, in that, especially that track where it's like the drumming, it's kind of like soft drumming, but it just sounds so sinister in a way that, again, makes Sinister continually creepy no matter how many times I've watched it now. But for the Super 8 segments, which one is the most memorable for you? Because there's a lot.
There is a lot. I would say the one that just because drowning for me is like you would never want, like, you just don't want to drown. I mean, Burning Alive too is horrible, but like something about drowning, man, that like I'm like, ugh. Yeah. And you know, that one where it's all the people in the beach chairs or whatever, the pool chairs, just tied up, and just one by one just getting pulled into the pool, still alive.
Well, it's so it's just very grimy and grungy. It's not that they're like, because everybody's getting drugged. We find out that Bagul he's called like the eater of children. He's basically manipulating the family's kids into killing them for him. He doesn't actually kill anybody himself. But so in that, you have to think about, how would a kid be able to do that? A kid wouldn't be able to drag people around. So they drug them, and then they put cinder blocks on the pool chairs to wave. And it's just like, there's an extra kind of like sickening gut punch to every single execution in a way that it's not just somebody getting stabbed, or it's not somebody getting thrown down a flight of stairs or whatever. It's there's a method to it.
It is premeditated to the max.
Yeah.
To the max.
And something in the film that I didn't really appreciate until watching it recently was the idea of using kids is so terrifying, because it attacks this idea that we're all very safe and comfortable with family members and whatnot. And so this like paranoia that gets put into you once you realize what's been happening. And just,
when that first girl climbs on the tree, you're just like, oh shit.
And she jumps on the body's leg. And like swinging around.
You're like, oh. Yeah.
But that's, for me, I think the one that always makes me jump without question is the lawnmower.
Oh, yeah.
Like, and that's one of the ones where the soundtrack is more what you would assume, where it's like a high shriek as soon as you see that head come into focus, but it's just so gnarly and just so unexpected, even though you know something horrible is going to happen. Every time the Super 8 footage comes up, we're going to see somebody get killed in a terrifying way. But at the same time, I think it speaks to the overall pacing of the first half of the movie. And for me, I think this movie's first half is phenomenal. And I think the second half,
I'm with you on that. I mean,
and we can kind of detail that.
Yeah.
And I think that most of the reason why is the investigatory stuff at the very beginning and kind of getting a lay of the land, because we don't really know the scope or the range of the haunting. We're still kind of exploring that. And I think the more that gets revealed, the more it hurts the scares in a way.
Yeah, I agree with that. Because you want to have some type of like not knowing, right? And then it's like the more detailed it gets, the more you kind of, it becomes the same song and dance. Like once you get close to the end, you're like, all right, well, I mean, we know what's going to happen. You see where this is going now. Like obviously, you know, and once it's revealed.
Yeah, and the second half definitely becomes more jump scary. Like there's the two jump scares with Bagul where he sticks, where his face gets right in front of the camera. And those two scares, they felt like something that a studio exec was like, hey, you know, it'd be really good in this moment, like a jump scare. And it's just like, it's so at odds with the creativity and the disturbing nature of the first half of the film, that to have that in there kind of was disappointing. Because I mean, one of the earliest scares in the movie that is still terrifying to me is the scene where Ethan Hawke's son has the night terror.
Oh my God. Comes out of the box.
Yeah, he comes out of the box backwards, and then he starts screaming bloody murder. Like, that's terrifying to me.
Exactly.
Every time.
And I love that one because it's like, it's not in line with what's happening in the movie, like, or like what's happening with Bagul. It just kind of is a part of, it adds to the scariness, but it's not a part of that. It's its own thing. It's its own scare, you know?
That was actually,
or him in the bushes. The son in general, that was a creepy. He's just you know what I mean? Like, he's just creepy.
Yeah, he does have a creepy kid.
Yeah.
That cardboard box scene is actually inspired by Derrickson's own son, has night terrors. And he said that sometimes he would just wake up and just scream like that. And I don't know. As somebody that's like, do I want kids in the future? I know. I sure as shit don't want to have one if they're going to be screaming bloody murder.
They're going to be screaming bloody murder and drawing on all the walls. Yeah, I don't know about that one. Yeah, they
gave that kid some liberties with their
freedom,
with their room.
Yeah,
I don't know about you, man. I took a Sharpie to the wall once as a kid. It didn't end well.
No.
Same parents encouraging me to keep that shit up.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, but I think as soon as the movie starts to move away from, I think when the focus shifts to Bagul more, it almost becomes less scary in a way. Because, don't get me wrong, there's two scenes with him that I think are two of the creepiest scenes in the movie is when you realize that Bagul, you find out that Bagul is actually like a thing. Because in the beginning of the movie, we don't know who's committing these murders. And then we find out who he is, and we find out that he is in every single one of the Super 8 films, hiding like in a corner or something like that. Like there's the knife murder where he's standing in a doorway in the back, and then there's the one in the pool where he does a freeze frame on it, and then you just see Bagul like looking right at the camera, and it's just like, what the fuck? Like, super creepy. And probably the best one with him, I think, is when Ethan Hawke is on the phone with the deputy, and the computer moves. And the face turns and just looks at him. But it's the way that that's framed up, I think, is so perfect. Because it's not like super close up, and it's not supposed to make you jump. But the way it's framed out almost, and it's such a subtle movement, it takes you like half a second to register what's happening.
And then you're looking, you're like, he just moved.
Yeah, exactly.
He definitely just moved.
Yeah.
And to go back to it also, I actually appreciated those kinds of subtle scares, because even with the knife killing, did you notice that you didn't actually see, they did a really interesting job of showing you what happens without like directly showing you. You know what I mean? So like with one of them, I'm pretty sure like you could see it in his glasses. You weren't looking at the screen anymore.
It was a reflection.
You see the reflection. And then like the one with the kid, I don't even think you really see it happen, because the focus then goes back on Ethan Hawke, who's like drinking, you know, because the kid's about to get his neck chopped. But like, I really, like you said, those like subtle kind of scares that kind of just, it gives you just enough. It doesn't do too much. There's no overkill, because, you know, sometimes it could become a slasher movie then. You're just like, well, this is overkill. But they just had really artistic, I'll say, ways of kind of showing you these layers, these scary layers to the movie.
Yeah, so originally they toyed around with the idea of making this PG-13.
Really?
And it got an R rating despite there being like no sex, there's barely any swearing, and there's almost no blood in the movie. And so I think that R rating obviously is because of the dark subject matter.
That makes so much sense.
This idea that it's about kids. And I think you're right. I think that if this movie was a lot bloodier, it wouldn't really add anything to it, because it's not, that's not really the purpose of the movie. The purpose is how disturbing this is and uncovering the mystery behind it. And especially like the reveal when you find out that it's not some guy. It's this guy that basically possesses kids to do his biddings for him. Like,
Yeah,
it's infinitely more disturbing when it's a kid doing these horrible things that we've been watching the whole movie.
exactly.
And also something that I didn't realize until recently that it was not originally supposed to be R-rated. I like that it's R-rated because you assume that the worst is going to happen. Like I don't know. I feel like if it's PG-13, you have certain expectations for like the ceiling.
You know the ceiling, exactly.
Yeah, you know the ceiling. And while this movie doesn't hit the ceiling in terms of like gore, blood, or scares necessarily, I like that there is no ceiling because you have this. That's the idea that anything can happen.
Yeah, it leaves the door open.
Yeah, and
wide open.
I think that is something that really speaks to, especially like my ability to rewatch this movie so many times, even though I've seen it and I know what happens. It still has this idea that, or this tone that anything can happen.
Yeah. That's what I felt.
I just love that.
That's what I felt last night. I was just like, man, it was the scene with the son in the box before that started, when like you hear noises and you're just like, oh shit, like what's going to happen? I know it's going to happen, but just waiting on the suspense and just like that feeling you get, which is hard to come by with movies that you've seen before. That's why like I'm always a little bit reluctant to like watch a scary movie more than once, because I feel like if I know it's going to happen. But this movie is one of those where like I still kind of like shut my blinds and stuff during the movie. Yeah. I was like shutting my blinds and like kind of like, you know,
I had, I rewatched this last night and the sun was just starting to go down. So I like hung up blankets over my windows just so I could block out anything that was coming through. And I got like 45 minutes in the movie and I was like, damn, man, I wonder if that sun's still up there. Need some light in here. Like, it's just, it really is this very oppressive kind of darkness that lingers with that movie. And it's just for me, like, it's such a disturbing concept. Like the idea that people that you love could be manipulated and not even, you don't realize until it's too late, until you're looking at the bottom of a coffee mug and there's that green goo floating in the bottom.
Foam coming at your mouth. Yeah,
exactly. And that idea that like you have to keep an eye on everybody at all times.
Yeah, exactly. It's an uneasy feeling, especially if you like are in a family, like you have a bigger family, or like just, you know, you're around a family. You kind of like start looking at people a little different. Like,
yeah, exactly. One that I really love about the ending too is, well, for starters, they move back to their old house. Their old house is big shit.
That's exactly what I was watching it with Ben, my brother. And he was like, wait a minute, like, so they got money. Like, they got money.
Yeah. What the fuck are they moving to Bumfuck, Pennsylvania for?
Some
for
little ass
house. Yeah. Like, he could have
so they're not doing that bad. That's what we should say.
Right. Yeah. Basically lives in a mansion. Like,
oh, that's a mansion for sure.
That Kentucky blood money was nice.
Exactly. Yeah.
But the thing that I really love about the ending and how fucked up it is that this all basically stems from his actions. Everything that happens is his fault.
Exactly.
And I mean, it begins when he finds the Super 8 footage and he has that moment where he calls the police and then he just hangs up because he realizes like, this is my break. But pause for a sec. 911 automatically calls you back, by the way.
Exactly. Or and if you don't, they show up.
Yeah, exactly. They show up. They're not just like, oh, somebody called and asked for the police and then hung up like that.
Because once you say it's an emergency, it's an emergency, you know?
Right. But, so he decides that he's not going to involve anybody else for his own kind of selfish means. And then throughout, he doesn't talk to his wife about any of the haunting shit that's happened. And then he moves them back out of this house, which speeds up the killer's timeline. And he also destroys the Super 8. Well, big air quotes. He destroys, he burns the Super 8 film, which of course regenerates and it essentially releases Bagul's power to like its maximum threshold. Yeah. And so like all of his decisions, his fate is entirely in his hands. And yet at the end of the movie, like, you fucked up, dude. I don't know what to tell you, man. You thought you could play with these spirits, and it's like they ended up playing you.
It is exactly what it is, dude. Like you just got to live with the consequences at that point, or die with the consequences. Yeah, I liked the ending because of that. I felt like, you know, what's weird. I had the Lord of the Rings ending thought with that movie, because you get like 4 like closeout scenes within that movie where they could have just ended it and then they kind of like keep going. But I kind of appreciated it because it's giving you closure on everything that happened in the movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're getting the closure shot of just the box, and you'll know that that box is always going to be there, no matter what. It's going to keep happening. You know, you get the closeout with the girl, and she sees the other children, and they like, they're on screen, and she's like looking at them, and like she's like she's joined the club now. You get that shot.
Mm-hmm.
You get the shot that's like on the Super 8, except for it's in the actual movie where you see everybody tied up and they're on the ground. So like you get all these like closer shots, which I thought was pretty cool. But then like I was like, okay, like I felt like seeing too much of the kids took away from it a little bit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then you see the makeup they're wearing and you're kind of like, well, this is kind of hokey, you know?
Yeah. So that's probably the main element of the second half of the film that I'm not a fan of. And I don't think this movie needed to be in almost 2 hours. It clocks in at an hour and 50. This movie could have easily been 15 minutes shorter, probably.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great example is the kids. And then you see like their makeup where their faces are kind of cracked.
Yeah.
Like the whole segment where he's hearing things around the house. And we realize that every time he hears a floorboard creak, there's actually like a spirit of one of the kids running around. Like that whole sequence, it didn't really need.
Yeah, I get why they did it because like it kind of looks cool, but it wasn't necessary.
Right.
And that up to that point, the movie wasn't that kind of movie where it was like all of a sudden you have these like people popping out of shadows and stuff. Like that wasn't
right. And I think that's what, again, the second half, there's more of an emphasis on jump scares, which is not what made the first hour of the movie so compelling in a lot of ways and so intense. And then by that point, when you start seeing, I think if they wanted to do that scene where you see the spirit kids in the background, they didn't have to have like 4 or 5 of them. Like you could have 2 instances of that and we got it.
And it didn't need to be a 5-minute like thing because it was like 5 minutes of the movie.
Yeah. I would have appreciated something a little more subtle. And not to say that I wanted them to put more Super 8 segments in there because I think that has the perfect amount of Super 8 segments. Like anything more than that, I think it kind of would have been just beating it over the head. And they actually did cut another Super 8 segment. But I read in the commentary, they say they thought that it was too disturbing for the movie. But I was like, the whole thing is fucking disturbing. Like, disturbing? Like,
how much worse did they say what it was? What was happening? Or they don't?
So it was supposed to be a family was because it's all about the seasons.
Right.
Because they had like a summer one and I think there was a fall one. And so this one was supposed to be like a family got dragged out into the woods and they were like freezing to death.
Oh.
And that was like the basis for it. And then something obviously horrible has to happen to them after that.
That's creepy. It sounds like it'd be great.
I mean, maybe if we had that instead of another one, like I think the knife one was a little tame compared to the other ones.
Exactly.
The other ones were just like, holy shit, I should not be watching this.
Yeah.
But yeah, were there any other scenes in this that you really enjoyed even on a rewatch?
Yeah, so I enjoyed the cinematography so much more this time around. I never really paid attention to it. And there was a scene in particular where he's sleeping on the couch and it goes from night back to day. And you have the shot where like you can see the sun kind of in the corner and it's going up. And just like that to me, I was like, oh, that was an amazing shot. And my brother was like, what? I'm like, well, you never see movies transition into day like that. It's night and then it's day. Or you get the outside shot where you see the sun come up. But it was just cool that they had just had it. You had the sun in the corner of the window. Just the way they did that, I thought was amazing. And the office, like most office shots. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah,
most office shots were pretty cool. They just write them in a dark light. Certain things were highlighted in the office, certain things weren't. So I really appreciated kind of how things were shot.
Yeah, I was going to say the lighting in this movie is really well done.
Yeah.
Especially like the handling of darkness. In a lot of ways, darkness in most horror movies can come off as you can't see shit. So you're just like, this is kind of annoying. Whereas in this, I feel like, again, it's oppressive. in a lot of ways. And you see little bits of light in other places. Like at one point he uses the camera, the light on his digital camera as a light source. And then you can see just like little flickers of light in the background or something like that. And it's this idea that there's this kind of evil in the house. And I know that sounds hokey, like the evil spirit, but it really does. It's evil portrayed in a way that feels real. In a lot of ways, it doesn't feel, even though we find out Bagul is this ancient deity, it doesn't feel hokey, like black magic or anything like that. We don't really know why he even came about originally.
Yeah.
So it's this idea that like they didn't do some ritual or whatever at the beginning of the movie to summon him or something. It's just you got in his path, his killing path, and once you get in, you can't get out.
Can't get out now. How did you feel about Bagul? Like just like the design?
So it's funny. They actually found the design for Bagul off of a Pinterest post. They were just like searching deities or something like that, and they found an artist that drew that, and they paid him like $500 for it, which seems cheap.
Wow. Okay.
It's funny considering the movie. They paid him $500 for that, and the movie only cost him $3 million to make, apparently, which is insane to me.
Yeah,
and the movie went on to make $87 million.
Which is safe to say they made some money back, just a little bit.
But to your question, I'm conflicted. I think originally, like as little as we see of him in those first few frames, I like. The more that I see him, though, he just looks like one of the band members from Slipknot to me. So I'm just like, he looks exactly like one of the guys from Slipknot. So I'm just like, okay.
He looks like, what's his face from Saw? Like he just looks like that, but like a little bit taller and he can walk.
Jigsaw?
Yeah. Like the face is a little bit like there's some similarities to like the face and the black hair, and it's like white.
Yeah, the long hair and the like trench coat, it screams Slipknot to me. And every time I'm just like, huh.
And he was like wearing a suit at one point. It was weird. Yeah. It was weird. So that took me out of it.
Yeah, the close-ups of his face during those jump scares too. Again, like they couldn't have scrounged up a little more money for some better makeup. I didn't think I don't think that his mask is very creepy, like that close in your face.
Right. Yeah, like you said, it's the less we saw of him, the more the better it was. Just because it keeps that air of, mystery and not really knowing what is it, what is he,
Yeah, exactly. Did you ever see the sequel?
I thought about it. It's on Netflix.
Yeah, it's on Netflix as well. It's streaming currently.
Have you?
I think I've gotten 20 minutes into that movie twice.
Oh no.
And then just tapped out because for me, so Ethan Hawke was going to be in it, but then bailed on that. It was written by Scott Derrickson and what's the other writer's name? Robert.
He was going to be in it.
Yeah.
He was going to be in that?
Oh, no. Sorry. He was going to be in the Super 8 segment.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
He wasn't.
I was like, damn, they took that took a turn.
Yeah. He came back to life. Quick reincarnation. No big deal. But so the original writers came back, and then the deputy from the first one, who's played by James Ransone, who's in It Chapter 2, was he's in it, actually.
Okay.
And he's investigating the murders. He basically picks up where Ethan Hawke's research ended.
Oh.
And so he finds a new family that, I forget how, because it's been so long since I tried watching it. They get into Bagul's kill streak somehow. But immediately it focuses on the things that I didn't like about the original, where it shows all the dead kids, like right from the jump.
Yeah.
So we see the spirit kids, and then the woman that he's trying to help has children. And the children, there's all these scenes early on with the spirit kids and her kids. Like interacting and having conversations, and the spirit kids are trying to manipulate her kids that are still alive.
Oh, man.
It's all the elements of this movie that I didn't like in the original one, but for 90 minutes in the sequel. So I would pass on that.
Okay. Yeah.
That was a long-winded way of saying pass.
Yeah, I mean, sequels for horror movies, sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not. But like, again, that movie it's so good on its own. And I just don't know why you would want to continue on.
Yeah, I mean, you have to imagine that a $3 million movie making 87 million. It's kind of hard not to imagine a studio is going to pressure you into making a sequel, even if you're not directly involved in it.
Cash cow.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you're right. It doesn't really diminish the original because, again, I've seen the original now 5 times probably, and I still enjoy it every time. But the idea that you would continue that story, like where else can it go?
Yeah.
That it already hasn't. Like nothing would ever be as shocking as the first one was. Because again, the Super 8 footage is shocking every time I watch it, and it never really loses its impact. But the idea that you would be able to give us something that just keeps doing that is basically just beating a dead horse at that point.
Yeah.
Especially when it's devoid of all the tension and tone of the original, and it gets right into the over-the-top supernatural stuff. And then there's even this like melodrama where the mother and her children are on the run from an abusive spouse or something like that. And it's just like, this is just not interesting at all and very generic.
Yeah. Yeah, that doesn't sound great. Yeah, I probably won't ever watch it.
You're good. You can pass on that. But if you don't have any other kind of last-minute scenes that you want to mention, we could wrap up.
Yeah, that's about it for me.
Yep. All right. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to chat about Sinister. It's a movie that I feel like I've gotten kind of annoyed, or I'm coming off as annoying to a lot of my friends because I'm keep telling everybody that they have to watch this the first time, and I kind of want to be there to see their reaction because,
yeah.
I mean, it's one of those movies where it's just like, it hits hard every single time, no matter how many times I've seen it, and I can't imagine what it's like watching it for the first time.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine either.
But it's certainly one of the most memorable horror movies, I think, of the last probably decade. I can't think of anything. I mean, it came out in 2012. In the last 8 years, I can't think of anything that has been so profoundly disturbing and kind of came out of nowhere in a lot of ways.
Came out of nowhere. You just wouldn't expect Ethan Hawke. But I guess because he was doing those movies, he had like that phase where he was doing all those types of movies. Yeah, I agree with you.
One of the things that I also appreciated more is how relatively unknown a majority of the actors are. Obviously, Ethan Hawke, especially Ethan Hawke, and then you have Fred Thompson, who plays the sheriff, who was on. Yeah. I'm pretty sure he was like a figure on Law and Order. He was for decades or something like that. He had a long.
What's his face? No, not the sheriff. He was the professor, right? Is that what you're talking about?
No, that's Vincent from Daredevil. I forget.
The professor?
Yeah, Vincent. I forget his last name.
Because he was also on a Law and Order. He was on one of those shows for a long time.
He was on one of the other ones. That's right.
Yeah, he also had like a long stint.
Yeah.
Dang. Well, so there you go.
You had these guys that were relatively well known, but nobody was on the same level as Ethan Hawke. And I kind of appreciated that his wife wasn't somebody super famous and his kids were kids that were like super famous, just because it helped kind of ground what was happening in a way. And it obviously allows him to be the main focus. Yeah. But that was something that I really appreciated on a rewatch. But anybody that hasn't seen Sinister yet should definitely check it out. And it's streaming on Netflix currently. But thanks for coming on, man. I appreciate the opportunity to chat.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Anytime, man. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Daily Horror Habit podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to Daily Horror Habit on your preferred streaming service and follow @Daily Horror Habit on Instagram or @Daily Horror Pod on Twitter.